Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. We're here a little bit earlier this week because there's lots of random stuff happening the next couple of days, and this was the easiest time to get it in. So we're doing the post-playoff show, and then also we'll talk about Wofford because there is a game happening this weekend, and it's important for a lot of reasons, right? A lot of seniors are going to be walking, which we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. Obviously, it gets you to 8 wins. Pretty rare that that's happened in the history of South Carolina football. And if you're Wofford, you get a $600,000 payday. So that's important as well. Support in-state schools and all of that. But first, let's talk about the college football playoff ranking show that either is still going on or just ended. So South Carolina came in at number 18 in the latest college football playoff rankings. Notable that right above them at number 17 is Clemson. Obviously, they'll get to settle that one on the field. Let me go ahead and just give you a couple of names to just like look at, and then I'll give you who's in the playoff right now. Right behind South Carolina is Army. They have a pretty big game against Notre Dame this weekend, and then they'll have a closeout game against a pretty good Navy team as well. So they have some chance to leapfrog South Carolina potentially. Colorado's at number 16 right now. This weekend they play Kansas, and then they still have an outside shot of making it to the Big 12 championship game and all of that fun stuff. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, the Dion hysteria, you'd like to think would not factor in whether or not they made it in a potential playoff spot over you or not, but you never know. Above them, you have Texas A&M at number 15, which you would think if they lost one more game, which they still have Texas on the schedule, they would put South Carolina above them because of the head-to-head. You have BYU at number 14, which is your lowest ranked team that is currently in the playoff. Alan, can you explain why number 14 BYU is in over number 13 and number 12 and number 11?
Yeah, it's really simple. They got to take the highest ranked Big 12 team no matter what. Big 12 gets an auto bid. That's BYU right now. That's also why I don't think you really have to worry about Colorado, because I don't think BYU and Colorado can both get in. One of them will, though, and they probably won't be ranked in the top 12, which is why right now your cutoff line, if you're actually trying to math this out, don't worry, we're about to get really weird here with some conspiracy theories. If you're trying to map this out as a South Carolina fan, you got to get to number 10 right now. That's the last at-large spot. 11 and 12 in the playoff. 11 and 12 seeds right now are teams not ranked in the top 12 because of automatic bids. You got to get to number 10 as of right now to actually be in 12-team playoff. And that's your target line.
And let me really quickly break down that top 10, and then we will start to weave our Pepe Sylvia, red threads as we try to figure out a path for South Carolina to sneak their way in here. So at number 10, you got Georgia. They have 2 losses right now. Their biggest test left on the schedule would be Georgia Tech next week. You have Ole Miss at number 9. They also have 2 losses on the schedule. They play Florida this coming week. Obviously, Florida is looking actually pretty good right now. And then they play Mississippi State, who, kind of dangerous. They have a good quarterback, but probably wouldn't expect Mississippi State to pull that one off. That one's going to be a tough one to jump, I think, because obviously Ole Miss beat you pretty handily in Columbia earlier in the season.
Well, would you say, though, just while we're talking about Ole Miss, let's say Ole Miss lost a third game. I'll go ahead and start the red tape here. I don't care. At that point, all 3 of their losses would be to teams unranked with at least 4 losses. They lost to 6-loss Kentucky, 4-loss LSU, and what does Florida have 5 losses right now?
Yeah, so you could make the argument.
The fact that Ole Miss lost 3 kind of inexcusable games.
Yeah, you could definitely make the argument eye test wise that South Carolina is trending the other direction, and Ole Miss is trending down. Obviously, South Carolina just won 3 straight ranked games. They've, if they went out, they would have won 6 straight games overall. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there's zero chance that if you have the same record as Ole Miss, they put you in over them, but that's not the one I would want to tie my balloon to or whatever.
No, I wouldn't either.
Number 8 is Miami, who is sitting at 9-1. They have a game against Wake Forest this weekend, which should not be too much of a problem. Then they close their season at Syracuse, which is kind of interesting. Syracuse kind of sneakily at 7-3 right now. But similar to what we were saying before with the highest Big 12 team, I think you're probably, unless some really weird stuff happens, only going to get one ACC team in. You wouldn't mind seeing Miami or, I mean, Miami or SMU, if everything holds serve, one of them's going to give the other a second loss, which will kind of eliminate the other. So I still, yeah, it's hard to see a path where
Yeah.
two ACC schools end up making it in. So I don't think you really have to worry about that one too much. Number 7, Alabama, obviously another team that has the head to head against you. Um,
Yep.
they have 2
They
losses as
finish
well.
at Oklahoma. Yep. And
Yep.
then against Auburn at home.
Yeah, and those are 2 games that they could lose, but you probably wouldn't expect them to lose both. If they only lost one, again, it would be kind of hard to see South Carolina put them over. Also, I think that they're one of the more interesting rankings this week. You think this is just like a Alabama on the front of the jersey sort of thing looks better to the committee? Because when you look at all these head-to-heads, I mean, yes, Alabama barely beat Georgia, who they are 3 spots ahead of, but they lost to Tennessee, who they're 4 spots ahead of. Um, I don't know. Like, is this? Do we feel like Alabama's resume deserves the 7 over Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee? I know they have a weird round robin thing happening between those
I'm
4.
a little confused. Mainly, not you can make an argument, yes, because they kind of have the better version of the South Carolina thing where they're playing their best football right now. Just blew out LSU at Death Valley, all that. They also have a loss of Vanderbilt. And I know Vanderbilt's better this year, but that's still right now a 4-loss Vanderbilt team and could end up being more. Um, I'm more confused at Alabama moving up, jumping a team that was on a bye week after beating Mercer. I'm not saying Alabama should have moved down. They won by 50. They did what they were supposed to do, but I don't really get jumping a team from an
Yeah.
FCS win.
Yeah, I'm thinking that there's still just that vibe around Alabama and who they've
Yeah.
been for the last 20 years. That's kind of giving them a little boost there. Speaking of vibes,
I don't know where Caleb just went. Looks like we lost him. We're still live right now. I'll keep this going. He said, speaking of vibes, going down the rankings. I guess we already talked about Miami a little bit. So we're going to me, this is where you kind of get to he's going up, excuse me. Number 6, Notre Dame. Notre Dame is 9-1 right now. That one loss is pretty bad. It was at home against Northern Illinois. Um, Caleb, we'll see what he says when he gets back. I think this is where you start to get to the point of this is kind of the area you need the chaos to happen, along with some SEC help to get you where you need to go if you're South Carolina. Notre Dame still has 2 more games that are reasonably tough, although you'd expect them to win both. They go to, or I think it's at Yankee Stadium. They play at Army this week, and then they play at USC, Southern Cal. Two very different kind of teams. Army runs the triple, that can be tough. Southern Cal still obviously very talented, got a pretty good quarterback. Okay, maybe Notre Dame. I think if we're talking, I'll wait for Caleb to get back, but if we're talking a way for South Carolina to get in there, I think you need a 5th SEC spot. I'm just not really convinced that the committee's going to put a South Carolina team with 3 losses all the way in a top 4 SEC. And that's where you need a 5th spot to open up. And that's where I think you need either a Notre Dame loss, a second Notre Dame loss, or you need a Big Ten team, one of the 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5 to drop. And just kind of continuing on that thread, you've got finishing out the rankings this week. You've got number 5 Indiana, number 4 Penn State, number 3 Texas, number 2 Ohio State, number 1 Oregon. Obviously, the big game this week in college football is Indiana, Ohio State, and Columbus. That's 2 versus 5. Yep.
Man,
Oh, there's Caleb. Maybe.
I was just ranting so long to the void. Um,
Yeah. I
what
didn't
was
know
the
where you.
last thing that you heard?
You were on Alabama. I kind of covered Notre Dame, but just the fact that they're going to Army and Southern Cal, and you're going to need them to lose one of those two. And for me, this is where you get to the crux of it. As I said when you were in the void, um,
Yeah.
I don't think four SEC teams get South Carolina in. I don't think you have a way to get to that fourth spot, but I think you might have a way to get to fifth. So you need five SEC spots in there, which is where you're going to need either Notre Dame or one of the Big Ten teams I just listed to lose. I mentioned Indiana, Ohio State. What's the ideal outcome of that game for South Carolina?
Hey,
That's number
my
two versus number five this weekend.
my speech to the void sounds like it was exactly what you said. So
Okay,
I was
that's good. We're on the same
channeling.
page here.
Yeah. I think ideally Ohio State beats Indiana really bad. They have the 100 and something ranked strength of schedule. I think if you prove that they are a nice little story, but not ready to compete with the big boys on a national stage, um, then it at least forces the committee to show us how much strength of schedule actually matters. Because I mean, you
Yep.
look at all these SEC schools that are behind them right now, and it's not even comparable. I mean, even most of the Big Ten, Indiana just got a very, very cushy schedule this year. You kind of could hold out some hope that Penn State loses a couple because they haven't particularly won big either, and in their one test, they did fall to Ohio State. But I think the Indiana blowout or Ohio State blowing out Indiana is a pretty clear path there. So if you get both Indiana and Notre Dame to lose, then I do think it really creates maybe some space for that fifth SEC team to get in,
Well,
which I think
that also.
brings
Go ahead.
us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's number four. I was going to say that takes me where I was going to say. I'm not. Excuse me. Saying this is going to happen. I think this is a little more far fetched than maybe Ohio State winning in a blowout or a 9-0 Army team staying undefeated against Notre Dame. But Penn State is on the road at Minnesota this week. It's Minnesota's senior day. Minnesota's 6-4. Um, they're not great. I'm not going to tell you they are. Most of these, I'm just looking at their schedule now. They've got wins over Rhode Island and Nevada to kind of brought them up to a bowl game. But they did beat a ranked Illinois team on the road. They beat Southern Cal, who was number 11 at the time, at Minnesota. Um, do I think Minnesota beats Penn State? No. Is that far enough within the realm, especially with that game at Minnesota, that a James Franklin team could trip over itself and probably knock itself out with a second loss? Sure. And I think that 4 through 6 range is kind of where you need the chaos to happen this week.
Yeah. And one more far fetched scenario while we're breaking down the last couple of teams here. Texas has Kentucky and Texas A&M to close the season. I would certainly not put it as anywhere remotely likely that they lose those two games back to back, but it's not impossible, right? And so if they were to lose both those games, they end up with three losses,
Yep.
and things get really interesting there. Really, just if Kentucky could beat Texas this weekend, which again, kind of a tough row
They
to
got to be like
hoe.
a 30-point dog in that game. It's in Austin,
20,
right?
20.5, yeah.
20
But if
point.
they
Okay.
somehow beat them, basically that Texas A&M game becomes an elimination game. One of those teams is going to have three losses, and you have an opportunity to maybe jump them. I still think you probably prefer Texas A&M to lose because you have the head-to-head matchup with them, and Texas is Texas with the whole branding and all of that. So let's start to talk about. All right, so we agree that Penn State, Indiana, Notre Dame, one of those three or two of those three need to drop out so that you can end up with a fifth SEC team. You also need some other things to happen with those Boise's, SMU's, BYU's, Colorado's, just to make sure that none of them are competing for that spot. But let's say you get five SEC teams in. Right now, the fifth team is Tennessee. Tennessee still finishes their season in Nashville against Vandy. We've seen, that work out pretty well at times for Vandy this year. Georgia still plays Georgia Tech. Is that on the road?
No, it's in Athens.
In Athens. So a little bit tougher proposition. And then we talked about Ole Miss and maybe the outside shot that because of the bad losses that Ole Miss has compared to the close, highly ranked losses that South Carolina has. Granted, LSU didn't do you any favors last week by losing. That maybe they can try to make an argument there. What else do you see as far as potential pathways in outside of those kind of two key games that we just talked about?
Yeah, I think that's kind of it right there. I think even if you don't want to throw the Georgia thing in, if you just want to talk about Tennessee, this is kind of what you brought up on Sunday, where if Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, and who's the fourth team I'm missing there? Georgia, I guess, get in. There's your four SEC. You would be trying to get to a scenario where it's between you, a 3-loss Tennessee, and a 3-loss A&M for the fifth spot, if there's five. Because you beat A&M head to head, you'd be on a 6-game winning streak. Tennessee would be coming off a loss. Both those teams, Tennessee and A&M, would be coming off a loss in their most recent game. I think that's kind of where this is right now. Is you're going to need either Tennessee or Georgia to lose a game, and you're going to need a fifth SEC team. That's if you want to. We encourage you to listen, but if you wanted to just boil this down to one sentence, not the last 20 minutes, whatever, you need a fifth SEC spot, and you need one of Tennessee or Georgia to get upset in the rivalry game. I think is that the fairest, easiest way to boil this down right now.
Yeah, if I want to break it down even further for just like your viewing interest this weekend, you're looking for Ohio State to blow out Indiana. You're looking for Notre Dame to potentially get a loss. You're looking for Penn State to potentially get a
At
loss.
Minnesota, yeah, that's at 3:30, I think. So same time as South Carolina.
As far as moving up yourself, you want Arizona State to beat BYU probably, though they may jump you if they do. Um, Auburn, Texas A&M. I mean, Texas A&M could go
I
ahead
think
and
you
get
want
that
it to
loss.
win that game. You want that win to be as good for as long as it can be.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And
while we're on that point, they're not going to jump you, but you want Missouri to beat Mississippi State, keep them in the top 25, keep that a ranked win.
Colorado, Kansas. If Kansas were to knock off Colorado like they have been giant killing here lately, then you would jump them. Just like gets you a little bit closer to striking distance heading into that Clemson game. And then, yeah, you got the head-to-head against Clemson, or you'll have the head-to-head game against Clemson to kind of settle that one. So that's what you're looking for this weekend. And then final week of the season, if any of those things happen and things sort of get shuffled around and it seems like you could have a fifth SEC school, then you're really rooting against Georgia and Tennessee.
So. Yeah, I think that's probably the fairest way to put it. And obviously, we didn't say it at the top of the show. It should be a given, but all this is you have to beat Wofford comfortably and you have to win at Clemson, which should be a given. But some people are going to hear the last 20 minutes and say we're assuming they're going to win those two games. I'm assuming they're going to beat Wofford, which we can talk about a little bit now. But obviously, you have to win out for any of this to even become any kind of discussion.
No, I'm perfectly comfortable with us being the two nerds in the Gamecock space that are willing to spend way too much time on something that's probably never going to happen. But it was fun. And I'm glad that we're still talking about it heading into week 12. Speaking of, let's preview a little bit of week 12. So South Carolina is obviously still rejoicing over a big come from behind statement win against Missouri. We went over kind of all that means on the Sunday show. So definitely go back and listen to that if you still want to bask in that glory. Couple of things that have happened since then. Lenora Sellers has won SEC Offensive Player of the Week. Well deserved. He also won National Player of the Week from the Walker Camp people.
Walter Camp, yeah.
Yeah, he's won a few awards this week. I get them confused. People noticed that he showed out the way that he did, and 5 touchdowns and almost 400 total yards in a win that he was instrumental in the final minute to make happen. Yeah, it caught everyone's attention. So that is good. Any other like last lingering thoughts before we turn our attention to Wofford? Anything that you heard in the press conferences the last couple of days where they're still kind of talking about it?
And I mean, not really. It's mostly looking ahead in senior day, but a nice little Juju McDowell basically saying nobody was going to tackle Rock out of that last play, and he knew as soon as he caught the shovel he was going to score. I think that kind of speaks to the confidence this team has right now.
Yeah, I think it was Mazio or somebody on Saturday. I had missed this quote, but I saw it after we recorded the other day. But I guess Rocket basically told him, like, I'm going to get in, like, whenever you heard the call.
Yeah, I think it was Nick Harbor, but
Nick
yeah,
Harper, yeah. I don't know. That's cool. You love the lore, That's some good
yeah.
lore. Um, so as they are preparing for Wofford, as we mentioned, it is senior week. Um, what can you tell me about the way that they are going to do senior day, and who we can expect to walk? I know it's a pretty long list, so maybe just the
We actually
starters or whatever.
we
But
actually didn't get a list this year because it probably would have had to be in like 0.5 font if they had listed every senior on this roster. If you include the walk-ons, there's 36 seniors on this roster. I think it's important to note that not all of those are, fifth year, sixth year seniors or guys out of eligibility. Some of them can't come back. Um, I don't know the entire list of who's walking. I know that all of the guys who have no eligibility left will be. So you're talking about a lot of guys. This is kind of the backbone of the week, but guys who took a chance on this program on Shane Beamer after committing to Will Muschamp, guys like Kai Kroger, guys like Hunter Rogers, Juju McDowell, Vershawn Lee, Boogie Huntley, there's
Tonka
a Tonka
Hemingway.
Hemingway, huh?
That's a Tonka Hemingway.
Yeah, you did. Okay, yeah. There's all those guys are going to be walking, plus all your transfers who are out of eligibility. That's Kyle Kennard. That's Demetrius Knight. Trying to think who else. I think DeAndre Jules. Maybe he still has one more year.
Kamar
Um,
Bell,
Kamar Bell will be walking. So it's going to be a
Oracel
lengthy senior
Simpkins.
day. Beamer said they're starting that ceremony half an hour before kickoff. If you want to know how long this thing might take. Um, so he has that has been his message all week though, is he actually used the line shut down your tailgate early, get in the stadium, get there for the seniors. This is a pretty big senior class. It's an important one for the program. Just looking at the trajectory of it. And you think about where this thing was when these guys got here, coming off a 2-8 season. Not all of them, obviously, not the transfers, but the ones in that first group I listed, coming off a 2-8 season. Um, not really sure what they were committing to, who they were committing to. I mean, Shane told the story Saturday that he had never even met Juju McDowell, and Juju still told him on the phone he wanted to play for him. So that kind of thing, I think it's pretty cool. And I think it's going to be a cool day to hopefully, if you're South Carolina, you get in, you handle your business, you get out, you're up 30 in the third quarter, you can get a bunch of seniors, a bunch of walk-ons in the game to kind of have a moment here.
Yeah, and as we end the season, we will talk a lot more about what the roster could look like next year, and some positions that they're going to target in the portal and stuff. But obviously, a lot of the names that you mentioned are on defense, and there's going to be quite a few defensive guys that they're going to have to replace. But yeah, seems like a good moment to come out and just celebrate those guys, the way that they've grown, the way that they've contributed to the success that we've seen this year. I mean, we talked on Sunday about all the firsts that this team has finally accomplished, and it seems like a lot of the players this week in the press conferences are well aware, I guess, of um, how far they've come, and it seemed like they were taking some moments to kind of pat themselves on the back for coming back and kind of fulfilling the dream that they had whenever they decided to come back.
Yeah, that's especially after last year where that's a 5 and most of those guys we just talked about were guys who could have gone to the NFL, right? If you're in 3 years, you're a guy like Boogie, if you're a guy like Tonka, I didn't, we both know this, and Shane said it. There were a lot of guys who wanted. He's not a senior, but someone like Nick Eamon after last year, portal could have gone anywhere he wanted. 5-7 season, all that. They stayed. They came back. They saw something different here. I think it's a big deal that those guys are having a moment, that they have 7 wins, have a chance for 9 or 10 or more. Who knows? Going back to that conversation we just had. Yeah, it should be a good, assuming they play well, feels good vibes kind of afternoon Saturday. Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about Wofford, just because there is actually a second team on the field Saturday?
Yeah, one more just quick roster construction note. Look out for my weekly recruiting wrap up this week because have some fun future cast to put in uh, along that defensive front. Um, Obviously, you don't want to completely replace those guys, those veterans that we just mentioned, with freshmen, but there might be some talented freshmen joining the class soon. Um, and then, yeah, you'll have to probably pick up some depth in the portal and stuff too. But we will save that for later. As far as Wofford
Yeah. Oh, one
goes,
more press conference thing.
yep,
Did you hear Shane Beamer taking a very indirect but also direct shot at Juice Wells today? Did you see that?
I did not. What did you say?
He was talking about basically what I was just talking about, that all the guys who could have left after last year and chose to come back after a 5-7 season and double down and all that. And I don't want to say it was unprompted because I think he was asked about like players who decided to come back, but he wasn't asked about players who left. And then he brought up, and you can go back and listen to the clip. There was a player on our team last year who told me point blank, I don't think we're going to be very good next year. I don't think we're going to have a quarterback, so I'm leaving, which he seemed to hint pretty heavily was Juice Wells. I suppose in theory it could have been a Pup Howard or a Stone Blanton or whatever, but the guy's talking about quarterbacks. That leads you to think it's an offensive player, and I'll let the rest of y'all do the math out there on who Shane was hinting at.
No, I think that's a safe bet because I think even publicly he said that after he signed with Ole
Yeah.
Miss. He said something very similar. So, yeah, I mean, I think Juice Wells has had a fine little complimentary role with Ole Miss this year, but he obviously would have been heavily featured here
Yeah.
if he would have stuck around. And I think it's safe to say Lenore Sellers is a true quarterback, and maybe he's, even if Juice Wells would have been here, it would have been a struggle and a frustration at the beginning of the year or whatever. But I do think that they would have probably figured things out. I don't know, man. He had a bit of a attitude issue, it seemed, as soon as uh, early last year. And we speculated, talked about the injury that was, but maybe was exaggerated or whatever at various times throughout last
Yeah,
year.
we don't
So
need to go down that road
yeah,
again. I thought it was a funny comment. I thought it spoke to what the tenor of the week is, just people who are grateful for people who stuck around and the seniors and kind of the people who are in the program. And it's Wofford week. What can you tell me about the Terriers?
not much. Nah, they they are getting paid $600,000 to come. They are 5-6 right now. They've actually won 2 of their last 3, but they lost their most recent game against the Citadel, which the Citadel is not a great team either. They have mostly started pretty well in games and then kind of like lost in the second half. They're actually outscoring teams 50-34 in the first quarter, but then the other quarters have not gone quite as well. And I would say the one place that South Carolina has had some weakness at times is along the offensive line, but Wofford pretty much has not been able to put any pressure on anyone with their front all year. So should be fine there. Um, I mean, this is going to be a blowout probably. But South Carolina needs to come out and play a clean game, not commit some early turnovers or give Wofford any sort of belief that they can hang around, because obviously this is the biggest football game that most of those guys will ever play. So if they feel like they have a shot to take, they will take it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing. I brought it up a little bit Sunday, but this is Wofford's last game of the season, no matter what. They're not going to the FCS playoffs. They don't have a game the week after this. So win by 100, lose by 100. They're going to empty the clip, trick plays, personnel packages. Beamer mentioned today in his presser that they've run 3 fake kicks this year successfully. They're kind of tricky on special teams. I noted yesterday, or I saw they're second, not just in their conference, but in all of FCS and punt return yardage. They're pretty dangerous on special teams. You shouldn't be punting much against Wofford, but if you are, maybe this is the week you just punt the ball out of bounds. Don't even give them a chance at a special teams play, anything like that. And then the main thing, right, is just stay healthy and don't do any, like, don't do anything that could give you a negative vibe or a problem with Clemson. Like the last thing you need here is someone flying across the middle and committing a targeting penalty in the third quarter that leaves them out of the first half of the Clemson game. Any kind of injury, anything like that. Um, we know what the football game is. We know why they scheduled this game the week before Clemson. Clemson's doing the same thing, playing Citadel, but you can't do anything that could linger into next week. Is kind of my thing.
All right, true or false? South Carolina scores more than 22.09 points in this game.
I'm gonna say true.
Yeah, I feel good about that too. That is the average score of Wofford's opponents throughout the year. I think South Carolina can pretty safely exceed that. And Wofford is only averaging 16.73 points per game, which yikes.
Is this the Debo
So
Donuts game? Can they get a shutout this week?
Debo Donuts.
He's been on this donuts thing since like July. That donut looks like a zero.
Oh,
They should be
yeah,
shutting
yeah.
out teams. Even after I think it was after Kentucky where they just gave up the 2 field goals. He's like, we should be shutting out teams. We need those donuts. And then he brought it up again after I think Vandy.
I think it will be tough because I think it's likely that most of the starting defense is not going to be in there much of in the second half. But we'll have to see how gutsy the second, third, fourth stringers are at keeping Wofford off the board. Maybe it's possible.
I will say too. I don't know if you looked at this. I don't know where Steven got this because most sports books don't post lines for FBS FCS games. The number he put in our staff picks for later in the week had South Carolina favored by 42.5.
I saw
That
that too.
feels like
Yeah.
a lot,
I
especially
saw that
with
on College Football News or one of
okay.
those like random sites, but
It feels like a lot. I especially in a game where they're going to want to get guys out as soon as possible.
yeah. So maybe that's where we kind of transition a little bit. So yeah, shouldn't be any problems with Wofford. Obviously, we will be here on GamecockScoop.com previewing it the rest of the week. We will be talking about it on game day with our live chat. It'll be fun. We'll talk more about the seniors and all that as well. But I think it's safe for us to talk about and fans to talk about. There's a pretty big game looming next week with Clemson. I know that Beamer talked a little bit today about having this FCS game on the schedule here the week before Clemson, which is something that used to be pretty regular, but lately there's been an SEC game this week. One, what did he say about it? And then two, how do you feel about that as far as allowing them an extra week to prepare? Like, how much of this week are we actually expecting them to focus on Wofford versus how much of it are they already starting to do a little Clemson install stuff?
Yeah, I think he gave kind of the very diplomatic answer. Coach, we play when they tell us to. It's up to Coach Tanner, scheduling, all that. He did say he sees merits to both sides, that there is an advantage of taking a breather from SEC play before your biggest game of the year, but also sometimes you want to stay hot going into that biggest game of the year. You want to stay on your toes. He mentioned that all 3 years he's been here, they've not only played an SEC game, but they've won it the week before Clemson. You had obviously the Tennessee game in 22 is the big one, but his first year against Auburn and then last year against Kentucky. So I think they're going to do a version of this next year. They have Coastal Carolina, which is not an FCS, but it's still a non-SEC in-state team the week before Clemson. And then I don't think they're going to do this in 26 because just looking at the schedule, they already have their non-con games set in September right now. So unless something moved around, and then we'll see from there. But I don't mind it
We still
personally.
don't know if 2026 they might switch to a 9-game
Nine
conference
SEC
schedule
games,
or
yeah.
something, but
I think it's good to kind of get guys a breather, and especially if Clemson's doing it, which I know you can't make your schedule based on what your opponent's doing, but if Clemson's going to do the FCS week before South Carolina thing and kind of do what you just said, rivalry game install, mental prep, whatever, you probably should be doing that as well. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's probably the smarter way to go about this if that's what the rules allow you to do.
Well, Clemson's entire schedule has been weeks off. Am I right? No, I mean they got tested last week, so I did see a lot of Twitter chatter this past few days from Clemson about like team injuries and stuff.
Yeah,
So
they're a little banged up right now.
I would say they seem to feel like they're limping into this game a little bit. So maybe it is good for them that they're rested up. I mean, South Carolina's got a couple of actually. That's a good time to bring up. What's the injury report looking like heading into this Wofford week? Do we see any lingering injuries? We know that we saw quite a few people limp off near the end of the game last week.
Yeah, there are a few, kind of the first ones all year that are going to stick. The main one's Brady Hunt. Beamer said he's done for the regular season, could be back. Beamer using the word postseason, not bowl game. He's still thinking playoff, but ignore that. Brady Hunt will not play this week or next week. Said Joshua Simon and Michael Smith are both practiced today and trending towards playing, but he didn't say definitely that they will. And same for Judge Collier, who got taken to the hospital Saturday. He said after that collision in the end zone down there by the cockpit. Um, we don't get an injury update this week because it's a non-con game. We'll have to do it the old school way and listen to Shane's radio show on Thursday. But it sounds like there's a chance everybody except Brady Hunt, who got hurt last week, could play this week. That
Yeah.
includes Josiah Thompson, who Shane said was available last week, but they didn't want to risk it.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Actually, was that just rolling with the hot hand after Tree played a good game the week before, or if maybe Josiah was 85%, you feel better about 100% Tree, maybe a little bit of a combo of those two.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I definitely think they don't want Josiah Thompson playing if he's not 100% because let's be honest, like, A, it's for himself, but also you are at the point right now where if the worst thing happened, like a torn ACL, that would linger into next season at this point. You're late enough in the year that a 9-10 month injury would knock a guy out of camp or early games next season. So I think you have
Yeah.
to factor in some of that with your younger guys too. The interesting thing to me, kind of the one thing that I'm looking at, I'm not sure how they're going to play. Tree Bubbalade is at 4 right now, games played. If he plays against Wofford or Clemson for that matter, that burns a redshirt year when he hasn't really played much this year. I don't know if that factors in. I don't know what Tree Bubbalade is thinking. I don't know if he's looking to, I don't want to put words in his mouth, transfer somewhere where he can start next year if the portal opens. I don't know if losing his second year of eligibility on a year where he's going to like start 1 or 2 games is going to factor into that. But he has been on the field in 4, so he's at the limit right now. And I wonder if that factors into this weekend at all.
Yeah, actually, he's one of the most interesting people for me this offseason because I do think that they need to try to find space to get both he and Josiah on the field at the same time next year. If you don't have a Kamar Bell or a Torricelli Simpkins out there, I think it's even arguable that he's played better than Case and Henry.
Yeah.
But whatever. Um, and so we'll talk a lot more about this in the offseason and see how people are leaning portal wise and stuff. But I think you have a lot of young offensive line talent on this team, and you got to figure out how to best get the best 5 of them out there. And going into next year, it would be tough for you to make an argument that Tree is not one of those best 5 in some form or
Yeah,
another.
I agree.
So I don't know. That's gonna be really interesting to see
That
how
also does
it
bring
all
up
plays
another
out.
point, though. Um, just going to run through a few more guys who are kind of near that cut line right now. Connor Cox has played in 3 games, so he can play one of the last 2, but not both. Obviously, you're down a tight end, at least one with Brady Hunt, maybe more than that if Smith or Simon can't go. So that's one to keep an eye on. If he played against Wofford, he would hit the threshold. Jawarn
Do you still
Howell's played
have
in 3.
Do you still have Luke
Still
Elksness
Elksness,
around?
yep.
Okay.
Um, Jawarn Howell's played in 3. That's kind of been your depth running back. He can take some late carries against Wofford, but if he does, he wouldn't be able to play against Clemson without burning a year. He probably wouldn't need him against Clemson, but still something to factor in. So he's at 3 right now. I'm just looking down the rest of this right now. David Spalding's at 4. I don't even know what his status is, but if he plays again, he's over the limit. Tree Babalot is at 4, like I said. Ryan Brubaker's at 3. I don't know if he qualifies as a young offensive lineman anymore, but he's in that
I think
mix. And
I think he's already used a redshirt year too, so it
okay,
wouldn't
so
matter.
he wouldn't. Yeah, I mean Nick Barrett's right at 4 right now. He hasn't played the last 2 weeks, but if he's healthy, do you send him out there up by 30 against Wofford when your D tackle room's not very deep next year.
I say to me that's one that you would try to hold the red shirt if he hasn't used one before. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that, but he's right at 4 right now. And obviously, if you need Nick Barrett to play against Clemson, you send him out there. But for this week, I would maybe try to stay away from that if you can. That kind of covers the list I had. Those are the guys who are near the cut line. There's some other guys who you don't have to worry about, who I think you want to get in this game. Like you can play Cam Pringle and not worry about it. He's only played in one game. Blake Frank's only played in one game. You can get him in there if you're up big late. Kind of all of that. But yeah. Matthew Fuller is only at 2, so he's safe too. You can get him some carries if he's healthy. He was another guy on the injury report last week.
Yeah, he was fully out injury wise last week, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of the red shirt tracker, which I think is worth bringing up going into a game where you should be able to get a lot of depth guys in.
Totally. This game feels like if you have any of those younger guys that are a little discontent, but you know you're going to need them next year, you got to roll them out there and let them have some fun on Saturday. Just get the feel for them, and then hopefully you can swing that into a narrative of why they should come back next year or whatever. And for the record, we haven't heard any of that on anybody. I mean, the vibes seem pretty high around the program right now. Obviously, individual people, especially you come from a high school background or whatever, where you're the star player in your team, and then you have to sit for a year or two. That can disgruntle plenty of individuals, but I don't know. The team chemistry or whatever seems higher now than maybe at any other point that we've been keeping up with it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to make a score prediction? Do you have anything else on Wofford?
No, my score prediction is whatever. South Carolina 56, Wofford 10.
Okay, that's covering that 42.5. I think they're going to get guys out pretty early and just try to keep it a little close to the vest. I'll say like 42-3. They don't quite cover, but this is very comfortable, and they're thinking about Clemson by halftime.
Let me give you like 2 prop bets real quick. You ready?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Dante Reno.
Ooh.
0.5 plus or minus 0.5 touchdown passes.
Under, because I think if a quarterback gets in here late, it's going to be Davis Bevel because he's a senior.
I think they'll both play for sure. Okay.
Also, I'll say on that point though, and I definitely don't want to make any speculation, but UMass fired its coach today, and I know I saw Tony Reno as a name on that early hot board. Like, I don't know, that crossed my mind, but continue. What's your
I was thinking about that a little bit earlier too, just because it's pretty clear that Lenora Sellers is going to be the starter here for at least one more year, probably 2. I mean, I guess it's possible he could leave after a redshirt sophomore year or whatever, depending on how it goes. But so even though I think Dante Reno is very talented, it may be a minute before he gets an opportunity. So
if his dad actually got hired as an FBS head coach, would that be enticing? I don't know. Right. I don't know what UMass's hiring plan is, but that's a pretty successful coach in the Northeast there, and they got to hire someone.
Yeah. Okay. Other prop bet. Let's go with Michael Smith, who caught a touchdown last week. Actually, do we know if he's going to be healthy or not?
He's questionable right now, but he practiced today. So,
all right, less fun. Let's go with who's a freshman linebacker, like J.R. Johnson. J.R. Johnson causes a turnover on.
Yeah, I'll go with that. We've heard a lot of things. Actually, it's good that you brought that up. I can't remember which player today. I think it was Debo Williams. Someone asked him, like, a lot of guys aren't going to be here next year. Who have you seen step up on defense behind the starters? And he said Fred Johnson. We've seen him play a lot. He was wearing the green dot at Oklahoma, I think, when he was in that game late. So that's actually, I'll take the over on that.
All right.
I'll throw one more in here, just really silly cross. So take the total number of points for the South Carolina women at Clemson tomorrow and the men Thursday against Mercer. So you're looking at 1 something, maybe pushing 200 versus total rushing yards for the football team Saturday.
Ooh, that's a good one. I will take the. Who's South Carolina men playing
Mercer.
basketball? I will take the rushing yards.
Okay, I'm thinking
um,
like I think both the women and the men could get to the 80s, maybe even the
yeah,
90s. So you're looking at like 160 to 180 there. But
yeah. I think South Carolina's going to have other over 200 yards rushing,
okay,
though. I mean, let's assume Robbie Ashford's going to get some snaps.
yep,
We're going to see all the running backs. Yeah. And I, as good as, not as good as feisty as Wofford might be, their front shouldn't
yeah,
be too competitive. All right, we will be back here on Sunday to break down what happened and probably also talk a lot about what happened around the country to these playoff scenarios that we just spun for you at the beginning of the episode. And then we start to preview some Clemson after that. So
yep.
make sure you check us out on GamecockScoop.com. Like I said, weekly recruiting wrap up this week will be pretty spicy, I think. Pretty fun. Um, in the meantime, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you. I felt like that was louder than normal.